I'm joined now by State Senator Royce Duplessis of New Orleans, who represents Louisiana Senate District 5. Duplessis is an attorney, a former member of the Louisiana House, and one of the most prominent Democratic voices at the Capitol on issues like criminal justice, healthcare, and now voting rights, with his Senate Bill 365 aiming to establish a Louisiana Voting Rights Act. Senator, good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started in talking about your bill, how would you characterize the current session right now?
I'd say we are making our way through all of the easy stuff, making our way to the more challenging issues, which are typical in any legislative session. We just rounded out the fourth week, so we're about a third of the way through. We go until June 1st, and we're taking up more of the more heavily debated bills. This is the third year of this term under this governor and under this legislative term. So a lot of the issues, a lot of the more controversial issues were taken up in year one and year two. Next year is an election year. So I'd say this year it's a little quieter. I would say it's a little more quiet, but no legislative session is ever too quiet. So you'll start to see things heating up pretty soon after Easter.
Well, how would you classify sort of the hard things and the easy things? Like what is considered hard stuff and not necessarily controversial, but what is considered sort of the heavy lift that they try to sort of I guess you're saying backload. So all the easy stuff.
Yeah,
What what
yeah,
what would you
yeah.
consider to be
The
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 easy
the
stuff?
thing the things that tend to lead to a lot of headlines for the most part. I'll say that.
Yeah.
And the more emotional debates that we have on the floor oftentimes deal with issues involving race, voter suppression, taking us backwards on issues around criminal justice, moving us in the wrong direction instead of moving us in a forward thinking, smart, data driven direction. All the issues that we would consider to be culture war issues, attacks on LGBTQ rights,
Yeah.
attacks on women's rights to make their own decisions around their health care, those issues like that we shouldn't be wasting precious time on and taxpayer money on. We should be focused on issues that we all are impacted by. Not that those other issues we aren't impacted by, but the issues that we can really work together to try to solve. And that's the high cost of insurance, fixing our broken roads and bridges, fixing our broken schools instead of defunding the schools, investing more into teachers, investing more into the schools. So prioritizing our budget around our most vulnerable and lifting them up and moving our state from last into not being last. So I'd say the easier issues tend to be not issues that don't fall into any of those buckets I described
Hmm.
earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, but those other issues I described earlier always find their way into the session some kind of way.
So I don't need to tell you this. You're in the super minority as a Democrat in the state legislature. How does a Democrat get a bill passed if they absolutely know that they need to get it passed? How does
Yeah.
a Democrat get it passed in this environment with the governor, with the makeup of the legislature? How does a Democrat
Yeah.
who has
So
must
one
have to do it?
105 members in the House, you need 53 votes to get a bill passed, to get anything passed, and there are only 32 Democrats. And in the Senate, 39 senators, you need at least 20 votes to get anything passed, and it's only 11 Democrats. So for myself, I need 9 Republicans to do the basics. If I need a two-thirds vote, like I do on some constitutional amendments, you need 26 votes. So I need at least 9 Republicans to be with me on any vote. And if I'm trying to get a constitutional amendment passed, I need 15. So to get that done is not easy. So you certainly have to have legislation that isn't that doesn't fall into any of the buckets that I talked about earlier. So if you're talking about anything you're trying to protect LGBTQ people, trying to protect women's rights, reproductive rights, trying to advance voter protections, these are very challenging issues to get passed because you're trying to convince Republicans to come with you. So it's tough. It's really tough, but that doesn't mean we don't bring those bills. And that's what I've been known to do since my time in the legislature, which is 8 years now, that despite the odds being against us, we still have to show up every day. We still have to fight because in spite of us not having the numbers in our favor, we still have to make the case. We still have to make them vote. We have to show, look, there is a large constituency of people who want us fighting for these issues. I represent 120,000 people in Senate District 5. Jeff Landry got 8% of the vote when he ran for governor in my district. 8%. That was his lowest performing district. And Sean Wilson, who was his opponent, his highest performing district was the Senate district I represent. So my Senate district is a stark contrast to what we see oftentimes take place in the Capitol. But it's important that we show up so that my constituents are represented, even if we're not on the winning side of the vote every time. Our voice matters. So I try to pick bills where I can be effective, bills that I'm not necessarily wasting my time on just fighting uphill battles, because I know I need Republican support. But I also make sure that I pick bills that, while they may not have the highest chances of passing, they still need to be filed. They still need to have hearings, and they still need to take votes on them.
Are there are there layups, things that absolutely you know, if you can if you take certain things out, all of a sudden it's much more likely to pass than if you don't,
Sometimes it just depends on the issue. I would say I don't think that there are any layups, and in this day and age, you just never know.
Yeah.
I had a bill last week that I plan on bringing back next week when we go back after Easter. This was a bill that would have given clear authority to the Sewage and Water Board in New Orleans to be able to go on to private property to replace lead pipes, which is a requirement by the EPA federal grant that we received in the amount of $100+ million. We got to spend this money. So it's a constitutional amendment to provide clarity that this would not be considered a donation, which is prohibited in our state constitution. I was 2 votes short of passing it last week because several of my Republican colleagues just had concerns. They didn't really understand it. So I had to educate a few and talk to a few, and I'm going to continue to do that. But that's something that you would think would be pretty straightforward, where we have federal money to spend, not asking the state. We're just asking for a clarification in the law so the city can spend money replacing lead pipes, and it still ran into some pushback. So I would say that there really are no layups, and you have to really make sure that whatever you're presenting is clear, and that you don't miss anything, because the things that you think might be a layup could end up posing some challenge for people.
And last thing, just sort of generally, because that's interesting to me. Is there anything that has surprised you that you thought would have been easier to build support, and you were sort of like, I mean, even on this?
Yeah, I've had a number of those happen throughout my time in the legislature, and the bill I just gave is somewhat of an example. But I'm at the point now where not a whole lot surprises me, unfortunately. Yeah. And you can't get discouraged. You just have to keep coming back and making the case. So while I'm here, you just have to show up.
Yeah. Okay. Before we talk specifically about Senate Bill 365, give me the case for why Louisiana needs its own Voting Rights Act right now, in terms of sort of the environment that we're in. What's happening politically, legally, and culturally that made you think this is the moment to file for something like this?
Just look at what's going on nationally around voting rights. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 is in the balance.
Yeah.
Section 2 was gutted several years ago under Shelby County in 2013, and that was what gave us pre-clearance. And now we are waiting to see what the U.S. Supreme Court is going to say with respect to the Callais case, which came out of Louisiana, on whether or not we still need certain pieces of the Voting Rights Act. So it's already been severely weakened. And my belief is that we can't wait. We cannot sit back and just say we're going to just let the Supreme Court dictate where we stand on voting rights. This is, as my Republican colleagues consider to be a core principle of their philosophy, this is a states' rights issue. we've always had the federal protections, but because we don't know where the federal government is going to be, we know what a Trump administration is right now on this issue. They're trying to push the SAVE Act, which is going to make it even more difficult and in some cases impossible for certain people to vote. So in that climate, this is absolutely the time where we can have the opportunity to say where we stand on voting rights. And again, this is a very hostile climate to try to bring this type of legislation at this particular time. But given what's going on at the federal level, I think this highlights the need for Louisiana to at least say to the world where we stand on voting rights.
One of the interesting things that I've noticed in the last 10 years in sort of the age of Trump is, and this happens throughout history, I'm sure you're familiar, just kind of how the parties sometimes realign ideologically, and it's based often on circumstances. And one of the things that I've noticed acutely in the last 10 years, but you started to see it particularly on issues like climate, and especially here in Louisiana as it pertains to like the petro industry, more Democrats, people left of center, more progressives starting to argue for states' rights because they started to, once you start to have a federal government that's hostile towards things like civil rights, towards things like climate and things like that,
Right.
You start to, develop ideology out of survival.
Right.
How do you reconcile that kind of change in approach for Democrats and for liberals or whatever they want to call us, leftists, all that, but like this sort of embrace at the local and state level for states' rights, because we're almost feeling like that's where we're more likely to be able to protect certain freedoms?
Well, I'll bring it up not because I believe that the supermajority actually is going to go for that argument. I bring it
Mhm.
up to point out the hypocrisy when we talk about states' rights. I believe that the federal protections should be enough. I believe that we should have strong federal protections that apply across this United States.
Yeah.
But when I cite states' rights, I'm citing it from a place of hypocrisy that is being exhibited right now. Now because the Republican Party, the conservatives throughout this country have a president in office who's pushing that nationalist agenda, and you have a Supreme Court
Yeah.
that is a majority conservative Supreme Court.
That will
All
be
of our
there
rights
much
are at
longer.
stake. That we simply cannot uh, count on to protect us. So yes, to your point earlier, it is a move of survival to say that now Louisiana has an opportunity. I'm a state elected official. I serve in the state
Yeah.
senate. I don't serve at the federal level. I don't serve at the local level. So I'm exercising my duty and obligation to put forward measures that are aimed at protecting the people of Senate District 5 and throughout the state of Louisiana at the state level, because we can't wait on the Supreme Court.
Mhm.
This Trump administration has made it clear time after time that he has no interest in protecting us. So this is what it's about. And again, I'm just pointing out the states' rights argument, not because I believe that we should be abandoning federal protections. I believe we need federal protections, but because the federal government has made it clear where they are, then I'm pushing at the state level.
Yeah. So the broader argument still remains that
Yeah,
federal
absolutely.
protections are obviously more likely to guarantee access to a right. But
Correct.
in lieu of a federal government that recognizes their responsibility, you got to
Right.
do what you got to do at the local and state level to protect those
Absolutely.
rights. Oh,
Absolutely.
okay. So let's if this yeah, let's actually break down the bill then. Walk me through the architecture of Senate Bill 365. What are the major powers or protections of the bill that you think people need to understand, and kind of break it down for me like I'm an idiot?
Yeah, look, it's basically given the protections that we would have had under a pre-clearance. So at the federal level, before pre-clearance got struck down,
Hmm.
what that meant was that anytime there was a change to what happens around elections in Louisiana or elections in states like Louisiana that have a history of voter suppression, voter discrimination, voter oppression, that they before change took place, it first had to get approved
Hmm.
by the Department of Justice. That's no longer in place. We just went through redistricting for the first time since we were under the Voting Rights Act without any pre-clearance protection. My bill would essentially set up a system similar to that, where you would have a commission that would govern that process, that would govern a similar pre-clearance process. Anytime there's a change to Voting Rights Act, to voting
Mhm.
in general, they would have to get some type of approval or blessing, if you will, that by this commission. That's really the main core of what we're trying to do in Senate Bill 365. And it's
So
it's it's a reaffirmation of protecting people's voting rights. It's a reaffirmation of ensuring that people have access to the ballot, in an affirmation that we're not doing anything to make it harder for people to vote in the state of Louisiana.
okay, so let's talk a little bit about the politics of this. On the Republican side, what do people say on the record is their opposition to reestablishing the pre-clearance requirement?
That we don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
We elected a black president. Why do we need it? Right? We're not
I,
we're
lo I
not the
love that
same.
one. I love that one.
We're not the same country we were in 1965,
Mhm.
where you had leaders like John Lewis, who's getting their skull fractured on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where they were using fire hoses and dogs
Yeah.
to attack people who were fighting for their voting rights. They're saying we're not the same country anymore. So now we don't need this anymore. That's basically the argument. And to go a step further, as you are well aware, since 2020, really before 2020, but especially since 2020, after after that presidential election, the conspiracy theories that have been pushed by the Trump and his agenda around voter fraud, and this need to now ensure that we have safe and secure elections, has also fueled much of what is standing in the way of us having uh, a, a good system in Louisiana where people can feel safe and confident to go exercise their right to vote. So now they're making it more difficult under the guise and under this false narrative of a lack of voter integrity.
As you're sort of doing your whip count, um, is the opposition strictly on the Republican side, or have you seen
Oh,
any opposition?
100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. This is purely a party line issue, just like
When
you
you,
see in Congress.
yeah, yeah. Well, when you get to that place, is it is there any willingness to, are there folks who have principled opposition in which they're willing to walk through, they're willing to talk through?
Well, we haven't presented the bill yet, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I would certainly hope so, that even if one of my Republican colleagues has opposition, that they would be willing to articulate that in a way that we can all appreciate, but I haven't heard it yet.
Well, I guess I mean in general, whenever the issue on voting rights comes up, and whenever we're talking about, I think because especially when it comes to pre-clearance, in a chamber in which there are quite a few lawyers, and we're all taught probably first semester of 1L year about, appearances matter, the appearance of fairness and of justice and not having conflicts of interest. And so when you bring up the issue of what preclearance is trying to address, which is a state that has a history of voter suppression and voter dilution and voter disenfranchisement. When a state has that history, just making sure that it goes through the proper sort of protocol to make sure that everything is on the up and up. What is their compromise to that, or do they not acknowledge that that's a concern that should be addressed at all as public officials? That for a state that has a history of discrimination and voter disenfranchisement, that it should have a little bit higher of a bar to prove when it wants to go and mess around with elections.
Yeah. I haven't gotten any good answer or justification or rationale from anyone who opposes efforts to protect voting rights. There's no good reason. There is no good answer. And it's hard for me to speak on behalf of someone else whose position I I can't justify or understand. I think I know the motivation. I don't like to speak on other people's motivations, but I think it's pretty clear what the motivations are. So I don't have very high expectations from those who oppose this in terms of getting a good answer or a good
Yeah.
response or a very credible rationale as to why they would oppose people having access to the ballot box and not being discriminated against.
So, what are some of the things that your bill, in terms of like practices, that it tries to sort of eliminate, um, in terms of voter dilution and voter
Getting rid
suppression?
of getting rid of precincts, shortening the time in which it takes, in which and shortening the time that precincts are open and
Hmm.
available. Um, Anything that stands in the way of voting. You have additional requirements, ID requirements,
Hmm.
which I don't have a problem with someone showing an ID for voting purposes, but some of the things that they're coming with now are just getting to it's just getting to a level of outrageousness, especially when we look at the Save Act. But all of
Yeah.
these different requirements, I mean, the amount of voter purging that's going on,
Hmm.
and kicking people off the rolls. Um, just there's always some effort to make it more difficult.
I like that you brought up the voter ID thing because I think it gets very, very simplified on the right. This idea that we are opposed to anybody showing proof that they're allowed to vote.
Right.
Can you explain to me what, from in your view, the Democratic position is on voter ID?
Well, I don't speak for I'm a
Okay.
Democrat. Let me be
But
clear. But I don't
what
speak.
is
I
your
don't
view on
speak for
voter
the
ID?
Democratic Party.
Okay.
I speak for myself as a Democrat. What I believe, where I believe the Democratic Party stands on this issue is that we do not stand in the way of reasonable standards for people to be able to have to show ID
Hmm.
at the ballot box, but it's the additional requirements that are being put on
Hmm.
citizens and voters throughout the country that make it more onerous, that are really aimed at voter intimidation and
Hmm.
aimed at keeping people away from voting, that they might have some fear of showing up to the polls that we have concerns with. So that's where we stand on that issue.
If the state provided a free identification that satisfied the requirements for voting and were willing to ship it at no cost to voters, would you support something like that?
Yeah, I would have no problem with that. Yeah. But there would also have to still be a standard in place that
Yeah.
if for whatever reason you don't have the ID, or
Hmm.
you can't, the mail broke down or whatever it is, that you're not prohibited from from voting, right? So I want to be clear. So I want to make sure that I'm clear on that question. There would the particulars would have to be fleshed out given the question that you just raised. So I
And I
wouldn't I
guess the
wouldn't I wouldn't
yeah,
carte blanche support that.
yeah.
I would have to know all of the specifics and the details on a program like that.
And I guess the point that I'm making
But it would
in
be at no
asking
if
about
it's
that.
at no cost. Yeah,
Yeah,
I definitely support it being at no
and I think
cost.
that's getting at the point of
Yeah,
what in general I believe is usually
yeah,
our the thing that we oppose is that if you have a right to vote, anything that costs money or presents an obstacle to that
correct.
right starts to infringe upon that right. Like
Yeah,
you could be dirt poor, not a
right.
dollar to your name, you still have a right to vote, which means that
Exactly.
that person needs an avenue to being able to exercise that right.
Yeah. So philosophically, yes, we
Yeah.
100% on the same page, and that's where these voter ID laws become a challenge, is because
Yeah.
it's the additional costs, the additional burdens of having to get this certain type of ID.
Exactly.
Or this,
Exactly.
now they're talking about your driver's license has to have an eagle on it, right? That's a
Hmm.
bill that's coming through the process right
Yep.
now. And all of these different ID requirements, they really are they're like a poll tax.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what they are.
And often it the opposite. The way that it's framed comes from a place of privilege because it's like, well, if you can't
100%.
drive to the DMV, then why should
Right.
what's the issue? And it's like
Exactly. Exactly.
you're
It's like
you're
it's like
not getting it. You're
yeah,
not
you're just
getting
not
like
getting.
if you've never been at that place, then
Yeah.
you don't seem to get that there are people that
Yeah.
live in that place.
Exactly. Well, there are those who do function from that place of not
Yeah.
getting it, the privilege, but then there are those who are privileged
Oh
and
yeah.
who
Oh
do
yeah.
get it and
Oh
know
yeah.
that
Oh yeah.
it'll be harder for those others to get it too. So it's that we're dealing with the combination of both of those.
Okay, so what kind of lines did you draw when you were writing this bill? What I mean by that is like, what did you consciously not include because you wanted this to be both durable, defensible, and politically, legible here in
Yeah,
Louisiana?
there were some components early on that, and I have to really go back and look. There were some pieces that were not included that I just did not want to include in the debate because I felt like it would have just been too. It would have taken some of the impact away because it was just so wide ranging, and I need to go back and look at what some of those pieces are because right now I'm just kind of all over the place. But we just wanted to focus on making it as clear as possible. There was some I think there was some other protections around like specifics that would have actually even increased methods around how people can vote when you talk about things like mail-in balloting,
Hmm.
extended hours for precincts being open. So basically, that would have not just provided protections, but that would have expanded voting. Those were some elements that were considered early on, but we decided not to go down that path and just focus on protecting where we are right now.
How far do you think we are from online voting? You think that's ever gonna even be
Yeah,
feasible?
I think, yeah, that's we're a ways away. We're quite a ways away. It should be that simple, but we're going to be quite a ways away.
Uh, Just as sort of as an
I
aside,
mean, this
how much?
whole push to get back to
It,
paper balloting and all of this
yeah,
stuff, yeah, we're a ways away.
it does. I think the last 10 years have been very have set us back in terms of
Mm.
public trust in elections to the point where I can't see it. A couple more questions. If if the Supreme Court, uh, because obviously, Shelby County got its Section 5, like you mentioned,
Yeah, and I think I
Calais,
made a mistake when I said earlier, Section 5. I think I said Section 2, but yeah, that was a mistake. I meant Section
Calais,
5. Yeah,
Calais
right.
is going
Is
after
that
Section
Section
2.
2?
Yeah,
Correct.
Calais is going after
Yeah.
Section 2. So if the Supreme Court uses that to sort of narrow, I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. If they use it to destabilize Section 2, what does that do to the whole theory of fair representation in a state like Louisiana?
Oh, I mean, it has direct um, and serious impacts because you're talking about the second congressional district,
Hmm.
second majority black congressional district that we just drew in the state of Louisiana would now be in jeopardy because they could then come back and say that this seat we don't need this seat because we equal representation isn't a requirement anymore. So this would have serious impacts for representation across the the state and the country. And it
Are
wouldn't just apply to congressional districts. It would
Yeah,
also
yeah,
apply to state legislature,
yeah, yeah.
and other seats, judicial seats, some judicial minority sub-districts. So the effects would be wide ranging.
Do are people explicit? Are Republicans explicit about how when it comes to, and not even Republicans? I'm not going to give anybody a reprieve here. Are politicians explicit behind closed doors when they're doing redistricting, or do they maintain like the sort of legal plausible deniability? Oh no, this is just a Democratic district, or do they straight up say that's black folks there?
I would say that from the standpoint of the Democratic Party and the Black Caucus,
Mm.
we have we've just always fought for ensuring that there's proper representation and unafraid to talk about race because race is a factor when you're
Hmm.
talking about redistricting. It just is. It shouldn't be the dominant factor, but it is a factor under the law. And that is also what's before the Supreme Court right now. So we we are unapologetic when we talk about the fact that this state is one third African American and we have six congressional districts, and that people have a right to select and vote for their candidate of choice. So we're not afraid to talk about race. Now, when you talk about other parties and what happens behind closed doors and all what these conversations are like, I've never had anyone tell me explicitly, this is what we're gonna make this district Republican majority. We're gonna make this district non-black majority. But I mean, it's
It's
pretty
just kind
clear
of
when you see how
understood. Yeah.
the maps are drawn. And thankfully we were able to draw fair maps back in 2024, but at the state for Congress, but in terms of the state legislative seats, the maps are still not fairly representative of this state.
Do you
And we voted against those maps. Democrats, Black Caucus members, John Bel Edwards vetoed
mhm.
maps, and so we still have work to do.
do you do you think that because things are so sometimes racially polarized when it comes to politics? I mean, I'm sure that you've heard times where all that people know about in terms of how the vote came down was how many black folks voted for it and how many and where white folks came down. And oftentimes
Right.
it will be six black folks voted for it, four white folks, like that sort of vote. Do you think that because we still kind of operate that way in Louisiana politics, where it's hard enough just to get racial representation? And so sometimes the argument within the black community is don't get too picky about what that representation looks like. Do you think that that makes it difficult for the Democratic caucus to have consensus on issues beyond sort of race?
It can be. It can be. Look, we are trying to advance an agenda that is inextricably tied to race. And what I mean by that is when you
Mm-hmm.
look at the people that are impacted by the policies that are passed in this state, the Democrats are not the folks in charge, but when you look at the people who are disproportionately impacted in a negative way, by and large, when you talk about black people, we are
Yeah.
disproportionately impacted by negative policies that are being pushed by those who are in charge. So there is an inextricable tie and linkage between race and party. It's just a fact. So as much as we try to separate the two, they are linked. And I say all the time, I say, well, if it wasn't, then where are all of the black people in the Republican Party? If just asking, I know there are some of them out there, but where are they?
Yeah.
Right? So we can't ignore it. We can't ignore it. But when it comes time to selecting candidates of choice, black people oftentimes look right now in the state of Louisiana. If we just want to be totally honest, we have Democratic cities, majority black cities throughout the
Yeah.
state. Top five cities, population wise, in terms of black people: Shreveport,
Mm-hmm.
Monroe, Alexandria, Baton Rouge, and the place where I'm sitting right now, New Orleans, where none of those cities are represented by black mayors,
Yep.
right? So this issue is much more nuanced and complex. And when but at the end of the day, at the beginning and at the end of the day, it's about Democrats showing up, being unapologetic about the fact that black people still make up the majority in these cities, that black people make up 1/3 of the population of the state of Louisiana, and we believe in fair representation. Now, whoever doesn't like it, that's their problem. But what I'm saying is that we are not going to ignore the issue of race. I'm not going to ignore the issue of race. And it doesn't have to be the sole factor, but it is a serious factor.
And the reason I ask that leads to the last question. I always like to ask people this. Um, in 2026, in your opinion, what is the difference between a Democrat and a Republican?
Hmm. In 2026, well, I believe that you have different types of Democrats. And what I mean by that is in Louisiana, a Democrat could look much different than a Democrat in Illinois or Maryland or California, generally, right? Because it's a general question.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that Democrats still operate under an idea or a notion generally of we're being a big we make space for others, right?
Mhm.
We make space for others, and we're not just going to always toe the party line because that's what they're saying is the party line is. Um, I feel like Democrats in Louisiana are have more of a tendency to break from party ranks because we are in the position that we're in. So we disagree a lot of times on what progress actually looks like. Whereas Republicans, they're just going to fall in line. And I see a lot of Republicans, unfortunately, who continue to vote against what they know is right and vote for things that they know are not right, all for the sake of not being ousted or shunned by their party. And I think that's one of the big differences I see amongst Democrats versus Republicans. And the policy differences, we all see what those differences are amongst Democrats and Republicans in terms of the issues. But I think going a level deeper than just talking policy levels. Yeah, Democrats are for voting rights. Republicans are not for voting rights, right? Democrats are for being smarter on crime. Republicans are for being tougher on crime, if you will, right? I'm just sort of throwing issues
Mhm.
out there. But I'm speaking just in terms of leadership values and leadership qualities around Democrats versus Republicans in today's climate. So I hope that answers your question.
I appreciate it. All right. State Senator Royce Duplessis of New Orleans, representing Louisiana State Senate District number 5, who is introducing his Senate Bill 365, which establishes the Louisiana Voting Rights Act. I appreciate you joining me and talking politics a little bit.
Appreciate you.